All right, let's get to this story. There's actually two stories combined in one story in that George Kittle has a new deal, biggest deal ever for tight ends in the National Football League, 5 years, $75 million. Excuse me. Kittle received $40 million guaranteed for injury, $30 million guaranteed at signing. The $40 million guarantee is more than twice that of any other tight end when that deal was in fact signed. The Chiefs are closing in on signing tight end Travis Kelce to a long-term extension. At least 5 years that keeps him in a Kansas City uniform catching passes from Pat Mahomes for the foreseeable future. I believe it's actually been reported as a 6-year deal now. So Pat Mahomes has his guy, and Jimmy Garoppolo is actually the quarterback, has his guy. Kelce's deal. So Kelce's deal is 4 years, $57.25 million. As opposed to the 5-year, $75 million deal. Kelce gets had 2 years remaining on the $46 million deal he signed with the Chiefs in 2016. So it's 5 plus 2. 4 plus 2, you do the math. There's, in fact, the 6 years. Look, they're both going to make a lot of money in the $15 million a year range. And this brings them on par with not the very top level wide receivers, but the second level wide receivers. And what should be pointed out, is how underpaid tight ends feel like they've been for a really long time. Now, that doesn't mean everyone was underpaid, right? Like one of the first fights I can remember in the past 10 years over payment of a tight end was with Jimmy Graham when he was in New Orleans. Remember, he had the franchise tag, and they're like, wait a second, he catches just as many balls as a wide receiver. Why isn't he viewed as a wide receiver, even though he's a tight end? And Jimmy Graham is supposedly a horrific blocker, right? Played basketball, as you know, in college. And he's the opposite of the traditional blocking tight end, and he's not close to being the two-way threat that Rob Gronkowski was best at, and Kittle's probably the best at it now, right? Like, I get people who troll me all the time. I was on Cowherd. We were talking about Gronk, and when I said Kittle's not really a blocker, I probably could have said Kelce's no blocker at all, but the idea is the 10 best blocking tight ends in the National Football League you've never heard of before, right? Because they're not fantasy football guys. Kittle, for how they use him, has really embraced the idea of being able to get onto people and to bully smaller people. But Rob Gronkowski is one of the few star tight ends in the history of the league, especially in the last 20 years, where you could leave him man up on one of the talented defensive ends in the league and not feel like it was just a sieve and that Tom Brady is going to be checking his, looking at his ear hole every time Gronk was man up on a defensive end. He's a great blocker as a tight end, essentially a sixth offensive lineman. It used to be quarterback and running back. Running back was the guy. Running back is the doctor of the 80s. They used to make all the cash. They used to make all the loot. And now look, quarterbacks still make a killing. A killing. And, quarterbacks are kind of like banks, where they're in the financial sector. They're just always, they're too big to fail. They're always going to make a ton of money. It feels like that's where quarterbacks are. And all the new money, the tech money, is in these hybrid players. Running backs that can catch it, run it, and block, right? That's Christian McCaffrey. And tight ends that can block some and that can catch, and they're too big for the defensive backs and they're too fast for the linebackers. And if you can become a guy who can do both, you can live up on that hill. And today is one of the first days I can recall where suddenly tight ends are starting to be recognized among the league's elite wide receivers based upon what they make. Because this blows the Hooper contract in Cleveland, this blows it out of the water. And it should. Kittle's better than Hooper. Is he that much better? I don't know, but he's a lot better. And this feels like the Parade magazine where everybody's like, man, tight ends only make like $9 million a year? That doesn't seem right. And George Kittle's like, yeah, that's going to change. And that just did. And there's also kind of a run on guys. There's some others that have to be re-signed. So we already have 2. There'll probably be a run on 4 or 5. And it does feel like tight ends are finally being recognized as being multiple guys and guys that you have to sometimes bracket coverage. Like the saying to me, or the way to look at it is, if you're an offensive player and you occupy more than one defensive player, you're much more valuable than somebody who, you got one guy spying on you, you got one guy looking on you. Quarterbacks, you got all eyes on you. Obviously, that becomes the most valuable. But can you, as a defensive end, can you occupy more than one guy? That's why safeties that can play at the line of scrimmage and that can play all the way back and that can be into coverage, that's why those guys have more value than the true box safety. Sure, you come up and you're a thumper, but can we trust you in coverage, or are you going to look really, really bad?